At this time, I'd like to turn things over to your moderator for today's session, Mr. Nick Stein, Director of Content Media at Rypple. Nick?
Thanks very much, Rich. Welcome, everyone, to the latest webinar in Rypple's leadership series. We're really excited to have Jodi Glickman, a sought-after workplace expert and author of the fantastic new book, Great on the Job, as our guest today. But before I introduce Jodi, I'd just like to say a few words about today's subject, performance reviews. Recently, Rypple surveyed people on what word came to mind when they think about performance reviews. And you can see the results on an infographic in our blog in the Loop. The winner was a word that I can't say here publicly, but let's just say it begins with bull and ends with it. Coming in a close second was stressful. So the survey confirmed what many of us know already, and that is that traditional performance reviews are horribly broken. They have very little, if anything, to do with performance at all, whether we're talking about employee performance or business performance. And instead, over the last 50 years, they've morphed from something really useful into what motivation expert Dan Pink has described as a highly stylized Western version of the kabuki dance. So here at Rypple, we're very focused on using real-time feedback to improve performance. Our thinking is, why wait 6 months or a year to find out what you're doing well and what you need to improve when you can find out right now, today? But the reality is that performance reviews are here to stay, and how you handle them will have an enormous impact on your career. So rather than just complaining about how much they suck, we at Rypple decided to do something about it. So we worked with Facebook to build Loops, which is an easy, lightweight, social way to do reviews. But regardless of what format your review takes, there are some strategies you can use to make it work for you. Which brings me back to today's guest, Jodi Glickman. Jodi has been an investment banker at Goldman Sachs, a Peace Corps volunteer in Chile, and as the president of Great on the Job, she consults with rising young stars at some of America's biggest companies about how to get ahead in their careers. Jodi's incorporated many of those practical lessons in her new book, Great on the Job, and she also contributes on these topics regularly to the Harvard Business Review. And we're very excited she's with us today to provide us with valuable strategies for acing your next performance review. So, Jodi, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nick. It is great to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with you all today. And unfortunately, this second picture of me was supposed to not be my glam shot. It was supposed to be me in front of my computer with my glasses on and my hair in a ponytail, which is what I look like right now. But that was the airbrushed headshot you're seeing. But at any rate, I am really excited to be here with all of you today. I love Rypple. I love the mission. I love what they are doing. I think that it is awesome to be getting people to focus on performance management processes all the time in a continuous loop, as opposed to just having a once a year, end of year conversation. And I will say the word, Nick, I was laughing here on my end that people think performance reviews are bullshit. And that's a problem, because the whole point of performance reviews are to make you better at your job. And so if you keep that in mind and you're able to put away all of the other baggage that you have when you think about that word, you can make yourself a better performer at work. And everyone on the phone today, the goal is to be a rock star. The goal is to love what you do and be great at it, to kick ass in whatever workplace environment you are in. That is what Great on the Job is all about. It's about giving everyone the tools that they need to succeed on the job. So let me ask you this. The first question I want to pose to everyone is, what is the purpose of the performance review? A lot of people, when you ask this question, say it's a waste of time, or it's there to make me feel bad, or it's an excuse for management to say that they've thought about what they can pay me and not give me a raise. There's a lot of negative baggage and negative connotation associated with the performance review. But here's the real answer. The purpose of the performance review is there just to make you better at your job. Period, end of story. That's what performance reviews should be there to do, is to make you better at your job. And so what we're going to do today is give you the tools you need to make people love you and to make you better at your job. It should also be there to give you real guidance on how to improve your performance. So if someone tells you you're not doing a great job keeping your client base in the loop, you're not doing a great job managing customer relationships, you fell short on keeping the last project on time and on budget, well, then you've got to throw the ball back and ask your mentor, your supervisor, your boss, the question of, okay, how do I get better? What do I need to do? Who do I model myself after? If you show that you care about continuous improvement and continuous learning, people will love you. Some people also think of the review in this way. It can give you an idea of what you need to start doing, what you need to stop doing, and what you need to keep doing, all in an effort for you to get paid well and or get promoted. So maybe you've got some bad habits, you've got to stop them. Maybe you're doing a great job managing your client relationships, and we want you to do more of that. Or maybe you've become complacent in your role, and now it's time to step up and start taking the lead in meetings. You can think about it really easily with this start, stop, keep doing methodology. Next question. What is the performance review not intended for? This one's a little bit easier, but nonetheless, it surprises some. The performance review is not there to make you feel bad about yourself, but equally important, it's not there to make you feel good about yourself, right? It's not a matter of me sitting here and telling my employee something so that he or she feels good, or I boost her ego, or I break her down. The point is just for her to be better. The point of the performance review is also not there for you to negotiate your compensation. That should be done at a different point in time. The performance review is, again, it's just a tool. It's just to make you better at your job. Okay, so how do I nail this conversation? How do I have a crazy good conversation with my boss so that I can really show that I'm thoughtful, I have good judgment, I'm working hard, and I'm trying to get ahead in my organization? There are two things that you need to do. You need to focus on preparing for the conversation before you actually have it. And you also need to manage the conversation yourself. You need to lead it. What really gets me going, what I can't stand, is when I talk to people and they say, hey, Jodi, I had a really just bad experience in my last performance review. I was told all of these different things, and I felt like I was being attacked, and I didn't want to be defensive, but they didn't get it. The conversation is not there for you to be a passive listener. The conversation is there for you to be an active participant, and you will do 100 times better if you're actually the leader of that conversation. If you go in with an opinion about how you're doing, what you've done well, what you haven't done well. People who have a ton of self-awareness are the people who really get ahead at work, who know what they're doing well and know what they need to improve on. And so you need to really take stock of your own performance and have that awareness. And the other thing I want to say is that in terms of making it a once-a-year conversation or a once-a-quarter conversation, everything that you're doing with Rypple in the moment in terms of getting feedback continuously, hearing from a colleague, a shout-out, hey, you did a great job, or loved how that meeting went today, or I think that report looked really good, or here's some room for improvement. All of those data points are going to be collected by you in theory to be helping you manage this conversation more effectively when you actually have it. So let's talk about the prepare and the manage. There's 4 steps. There's 4 things, and only 4, that you need to do to have a great performance review and to make sure that you are on track to meet your goals and get what you want. Do you want to get promoted? Do you want to get a raise? Do you want to move to a new division? Do you want a rotation in London? Whatever it is you want, this should be the tool to help you get there. So the first thing you need to do is do your homework. The second thing you need to do is prepare your personal matrix. I'll show you what that is in a minute. Those are both the before. That's before you're in the room. And then when you're in the room, when you're having that conversation, you've got to manage it. And the two things you need to do there are be prepared to lead and also be receptive to constructive criticism. Being defensive is the kiss of death. Arguing a point, getting angry, throwing your pencil, walking out, God forbid. You don't want to do any of that. Everyone will remember that outburst long after they've remembered the actual content of the conversation you actually had. So it's pretty counterproductive to get pissed off or angry or storm out of a conversation. So hopefully you're not going to do that. Oops. Okay, so step one, do your homework. Oops. My slides are going batty on me here. Okay, the first thing you need to do is not be surprised and not be defensive. And this goes back to our point that if you're getting feedback throughout the year, if you're having conversations regularly with your manager, your colleagues, your supervisor, if you're touching base with your coworkers, then you should have a sense of what's going well and what's not going well. So you don't want to be surprised. And if you do your homework, you prepare your personal matrix and you think about the conversation in advance, 9 times out of 10, you won't be surprised. The other thing, as I just mentioned, is you can't be defensive. If it's unfair, you're allowed to say so. If you need to take time and think through the conversation, you can do that as well. But what you can't do is get angry in the moment. Okay, so here are the first 2 questions I want you to ask yourself. As you are thinking about preparing for this review, and remember, it is your responsibility. You are an active participant in this conversation. You're not just going in there to listen to what other people say. Your first 2 questions are, what have you contributed to your teams, and what are your goals for 2012? If you don't take the time before you have the conversation to think about those questions, frankly, in my mind, you don't deserve to have a good performance review. So you need to think about what have you contributed and what are your goals. Possible contributions to your team. We have 500 people on the line today, which is super exciting. We have people from all different walks of life, all different industries. I have no idea what your personal contributions are, but here are examples of a few of them. Maybe you learned JavaScript. Maybe you created new templates for your customer email blast, or you finally are supervising a team of junior folks. Maybe you've assisted in some successful pitches and brought in new client accounts to your advertising agency. This is the time when you get to pat yourself on the back, when you get to take stock of all of the accomplishments and make sure that you are there tooting your own horn. No one's going to do it for you. And I'm not saying be a jackass and go, be bragging to everyone in your office about how great you are, but I'm saying think really hard about what you've done and what you've contributed and be able to speak to those so that in case your manager doesn't know the good stuff, you're there to fill her in. You're there to let her know that you have made meaningful and real contributions to your teams over the last 3, 6, 9 months, whatever the amount of time may be. The flip side of that is I also want you to tell me what your personal goals are. What are you aiming for? What are you trying to achieve next year? What are you doing to get that raise or promotion or to move over into the R&D team or to get out of your engineering role and take a more managerial role? You need to be thinking about those stretch roles or what your own goals are. Right? If you don't know what those goals are, who do you think is taking responsibility for making them happen? Someone once said to me that no one cares more about managing your career than you do. And I'm a firm believer in that, right? You've got to be the one driving the bus. So you need to come to me and say, hey, Jodi, I've had a really great year. Here's what I've been working on. Here's what I'd really like to do in 2012. I'd really like to lead a client engagement on my own, or I'd really like to take a crack at supervising the creative staff. Maybe you want to represent your company at conference or industry events. Maybe you want to work on something cross-divisional. Whatever it is, when you come to me and I'm your manager and you tell me what your goals are and what you want to do, you're doing my work for me. I love you when you come and tell me what you want to work on, as opposed to me having to think through, okay, what kind of assignments do I need to make sure she's got? How am I ensuring she's growing personally? How do I know she really feels fulfilled and loves her job? If you come to me and give me your goals, you're being generous because you're doing part of my job for me as a manager. And let's face it, no one has time to do anything anymore, right? We're all doing more with less. We are all totally spent in terms of our energy and resources and time we can focus on tasks. So if you make someone's life better or easier, i.e. your managers, people will love you. Okay, next two questions. What are you most proud of, and what areas of development do you want to focus on? Maybe what you're proud of isn't necessarily tied directly to your contributions. Maybe it's something you've learned, but your manager wouldn't know that. What areas of development do you want to focus on? In the same vein that you're talking about your goals for next year, you also want to show that you have self-awareness. You recognize where in the learning curve you need to keep pushing yourself. You recognize what areas you want to get more experience in. You recognize areas where maybe you haven't had success in the past, but now you want to really focus on your technical skills or your programming skills, or you really, really want to work on your client interactions so that you can close a deal on your own. Think about those things in terms of your accomplishments, what you're proud of, and then the areas of development. And again, I don't know what you're great at. I don't know what you need to work on, but I do know people can be proud of getting up to speed quickly when they've joined a new team, managing a ton of different information or a lot of different balls up in the air. Or I'm really happy or proud of the fact that I've brought in, 3 new clients to the firm, or I've been able to adapt to the changes in management after we've gone through the reorg, and I've been a cheerleader for our team. I really think I've helped with, employee morale. Some of the softer stuff your manager may not necessarily know about. So in the same way you are going to keep this running tab of your contributions, you're also going to think about what are you proud of and be able to communicate that to your manager. And then lastly, this is where you get to show that you are introspective, that you have insight, that you're thinking through your own personal development. What do you need to keep working on? I was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. And so I used to keep a running list of all of the deals that I had worked on and the types of deals I hadn't had any interaction with. I kept a list of who I had worked with and the people I wanted to work with going forward. We'll talk about that in a minute in our personal matrix. But your areas for development, if you're not great with detail, you can acknowledge that that's something you're working on and trying to improve. If you know that you can do better in client meetings, presenting to a group, maybe you got caught with your pants down in terms of, not getting a deliverable on time, and so you really want to make sure that you do a better job managing competing deadlines. Or maybe you're new to your organization, and you came in there and you were full of energy and enthusiasm, and you didn't really know how to do your job. But you didn't want to tell anyone that because you didn't want to appear stupid or uninformed or helpless. And so what you've realized now is that you have the confidence that, I can ask for help earlier in the process. I probably should have gotten more people involved earlier in this marketing brief I was working on. Or I probably should have sought out Rebecca and Jonathan to make sure they were on board with the direction I was going. So I'm going to bring people in earlier. I'm going to ask for help earlier in the process. When you come to me and you show me what you're really excited about and what you're going to focus on next year, you just show me that you are taking charge of your career. You are someone I want to move through the ranks of our organization. So I'm going to go on to step 2 in our personal matrix in a moment, but Nick, I just want to see if we've got any Q&A because I'm happy to take it as we go through the presentation.
Sure.
You want to pick one?
Someone just wrote in and said that they had missed the slide on what the performance review is supposed to do. Can you just kind of quickly summarize kind of
Sure.
the key message that the performance review is meant to be?
Yeah. So the performance review is meant to make you better at your job. That's it. It's not there to make you feel good. It's not there to make you feel bad. It's not there for you to negotiate your pay package. It's just to make you better at your job. Think of it as a performance tool, as just one of many you've got in your toolkit to help you get better. That's all it really is. And I see there's a bunch of others here. Hold on, let me take a look and see. That was a Rypple question.
Yeah, there's a question about from the employer perspective.
Yep. So today we're just going to focus on the employee, but I'm happy to take questions like that offline or after the presentation. I will say the quick answer is, as an employer, in terms of being really effective in giving performance reviews, are also doing your homework beforehand, thinking about what people have done well, thinking about areas for development, and thinking about delivering the message in a constructive way so that you're not actually telling someone just that they're not doing something well, but you're actually pushing yourself to think and say, all right, well, how can I help them get better? You know, I'm a real big proponent of generosity. I think generosity is the cornerstone of success in the workplace. And so as an employer, I have no problem with you giving me tough feedback. I have no problem with you telling me I'm not doing a great job on something. What I do have a problem with is hearing that I'm not doing a good job, but not being given any guidance on how to improve, not being given suggestions on people to speak with or things that I can do to improve. So as an employer, I would say don't be afraid of the tough conversations. Just make sure that you are armed with really helpful strategies and advice of what you did to overcome that barrier, how you saw people get through the similar situation, or what you would recommend. That's what people will take away as helpful. Telling me I'm doing great or not doing great, that's just one piece of the puzzle. And I think the second piece of how to get better is where people typically fall off a cliff and don't necessarily follow through of where, you know, in theory, you'd like to see them have follow through. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay. So let's go on, and then we'll take some more. And maybe Nick, you can just pick some good ones as you see them coming in, so I don't take the time to be reading them.
Absolutely.
Okay. So your personal matrix. So you've gone through step one of your homework, which is think about what you've contributed to your teams. Think about what your goals for 2012 are. Think about what you're most proud of, and think about your areas for development. Now, I want to take it one step further with you, and I want you to come up with your own personal matrix. This is something I developed as somewhat of a coping mechanism, if you will, when I was on Wall Street. So I was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs, and I'll be honest with you all, I wasn't very good. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Latin America. I had worked as a policy analyst at the EPA, and merger math is really not my strong point. And I came onto Wall Street, and I was scared to death. And I thought, I'm screwed. How did I get here? What am I going to do? I'm totally screwed. But what I did was I took a really, really active role in managing my workload and making sure that I got the skills necessary so that I could be a rock star at work. And so I created something called my personal matrix, where I kept a running tab every quarter of what I was doing. If I was working on a client service project for a big pharma, or I was working on an M&A deal for a biotech company, if I had done any type of leveraged buyout analysis, or if I'd really spent most of my time doing strategic analysis, I wanted to know exactly what I was doing, and I kept a running list. And I also kept a list of all of the people I was working with. Who were the VPs and MDs I was interacting with? Who could really speak to my skill set and tell me whether I was doing a good job? Who was I working with in equity capital markets or debt capital markets? Who was I interacting with across the firm? I wanted to have a good sense of my network and the people that would go to bat for me. So I made up my current side of that paper, what I was working on and who I was working with. And then more importantly, I came up with my wish list, which was, here's what I need to do. Here's the experience I need to get to be a good second-year associate. Or here's what I think I need to do to get promoted to VP next year. And I came up with a wish list. And for me, that was running a sell-side deal on my own, or making sure that I got a debt financing deal that was, high yield, and so it was a little bit hairier than a straight corporate investment-grade borrower. I thought really long and hard about what do I need to do, what do I want to do, what haven't I done, and I put them on my wish list. And then I took it one step further, and I said, okay, who do I want to work with? Who do I know that is great at their job? Who have I not had an opportunity to interact with? And I kept this matrix in my desk, and quarterly I would go to my staffer. And banking is a little bit different in terms of a professional service or client service business where you've got someone who's managing all of the workload, and they're basically taking all the junior people, i.e. me, and we're free agents. They take us and they slot us in on a deal or a project as needed. And so being a free agent, I would go to my staffer and say, here's what I'm doing, here's what I've been working with, here's what I need to happen. You got to get me on an LBO deal next month. I want to make sure I work with Luke and Peter in the next 6 months. I love them. I think they're great. I know I could learn a lot from them. Or you know what? I haven't had an opportunity to work with anyone outside of our healthcare group. Can you get me staffed on a consumer retail deal or an energy deal? Or can you get me involved with a, leverage finance deal so that I can start working with those guys down there because I haven't met them? And again, what this did for me was it made my staffer love me because I was doing his job for him. Right? He had a ton of people he was managing. He was supposed to know what everyone was doing and make sure we were all being developed professionally. But I basically went in and said, listen, I'm going to tell you what's going on. Here's my matrix, and I didn't call it that for him. Right? Here's who I'm working with. Here's what I'm working on, and here's what I want to make happen. And he would take a look at the list, and he didn't say yes all the time. I'm not being unrealistic here. And he didn't say, okay, great, we'll get you on this deal tomorrow, or we'll give you exposure to Will tomorrow. Will was a great VP I worked with. What he'd say was, okay, great, you know what, this is really good information, and I'm going to keep this and make sure that your future staffing reflects some of the wishes. And we'll try and make as much of this happen as we can. So taking the reins and being proactive and making sure you ask for not only what you want, but also what you think you need to succeed, that is going to put you in great stead. And so if you do this personal matrix and you just leave it in your drawer and you don't take it to anyone, maybe you're not in the staffing model. But when you go have that performance review, if you can speak to these points, and when we have the conversation, which we'll talk about in a minute, if you speak to these points, people are going to think, God, you are really proactive. You really are taking control of your career and your learning. You care. You're not just doing your job. You're not just phoning it in. You really care about contributing to this organization, about learning, about making the most of your experience. That is a powerful message to send to your manager, and that will make people love you. So, anyone Nick, you want to chime in with a question now? You want to wait?
A couple of interesting questions that have come up sort of relate to, what if your boss tells you that something you think is unfair? It's sort of hard to respond to that. How do you respond to something like that you don't agree with without sounding defensive?
It's a great question, and there's a really easy way to handle it. What you do is you say, thank you, even if you hate what you're hearing. I respectfully disagree, but I hear your point, and I want to think about it. Or I'd like to get some additional input from other folks and see if they agree, because I don't really see the situation that way. What you want to do is you want a message that you are open and receptive to people giving you feedback, because if you're not receptive to it, they're going to stop telling you things, stop giving you feedback. And to the extent that the feedback is actually meaningful and helpful, you do want to hear it, even if it's hard. But you don't have to agree with everyone. You don't have to put a smile on your face and say, okay. What you do is you say, you know what, that's not the way I see it, but I appreciate your perspective and I want to take some time to think about it. Or that doesn't really sound to me like that's accurate, but I'd love to go ask a few other people if they agree. Or maybe you have to say, I understand that is your viewpoint. I don't agree, and I think on this one we are going to have to agree to disagree. So you always want to be polite and professional. You never want to take it down to, a boxing match. You want to take the high ground. And if you do really feel like maybe there's something there, go get some validation or confirmation that it's true or not true. go make yourself feel better by, talking to a few other people and saying, hey, I just got this piece of feedback. I really don't agree. Would love your honest opinion, and get some buy-in from other people. And to the extent that you hear that no one agrees with what you've heard, you can go back to your manager and say, hey, I talked to a few people because I was upset about that because that didn't feel right to me. And the general consensus was, I am doing a really good job managing this client relationship. So let's talk about how we can work together so that you feel that way as well, right? I'm not going to debate the point per se. I'm going to go and say, okay, let's go figure out how we can find common ground.
Would you like another question, or do you want to move forward?
Sure, let's do one more, and then we'll move forward.
Okay. This is an interesting question regarding the whole 360 feedback concept.
Yep.
Is it something that you would recommend collecting yourself and then being able to kind of share it with your manager, or should you leave it up to a manager to do that?
I'm sorry, is this related to the last question, or are we just different now on 360 review feedback?
It's just a different
question. 360-degree feedback, I think it's probably better to have someone else do it for you. I think that when I talk about, and this is a different topic, but when I talk about asking for feedback, I'm a big proponent of not putting people on the spot. I'm a big proponent of planting the seed, letting someone know you'd love to get some feedback from them, and then exiting stage left. Right, then go ahead and schedule a conversation for a later date and time. Then go ahead and send them an email and say, here are the things I'd love to get feedback on. Maybe we could discuss this in a few weeks. I think that people tend to be, no one wants to give negative. First of all, let's do one thing. No one likes giving negative feedback. I mean, it is not fun to tell someone they're not doing a good job, and there's very few people I know who like confrontation. Right, so giving negative feedback is hard to do, and a lot of people punt and just say you're doing a great job just to avoid a difficult conversation. So I think in the 360-degree review process, if you really care about getting good feedback from people, I would have someone else solicit it on your behalf so people feel like they can be open and honest. And then, whether you're doing it anonymously or by name, that determines how you follow up with people. But, I just think it's hard to do it on the spot. So one of the funny things or fun things that I do when I'm giving a presentation, and a lot of what I do at Great on the Job is training young professionals across corporate America, on Wall Street, at leading business schools, is giving them all of these tools and strategies to have effective daily one-on-one conversations. So forget the performance review for a moment, but how do you ask for help and sound smart while you're doing it? How do you answer a question you don't know the answer to? How do you raise a red flag when there's a problem? And when I get to the topic of asking for feedback, which is one I really love to cover, I'll call on someone in the audience and I'll say, hey, Jonathan, how am I doing up here? Guess what Jonathan says to me 100% of the time, right? You're in a room full of 100 people. Jonathan always tells me I'm doing a great job, because what's he going to say in front of a public audience when he's put on the spot? So I think if you really want good, effective feedback, you need to make it easy on the person delivering the feedback. And one of the ways to do that is to give them some advance notice or not put them directly on the spot where they feel defensive or unprepared. Okay, so let's talk about be prepared to lead. So now I'm going to assume you've taken the advice and you've done your homework. You've thought about what you've done well, what you need to work on. You've come up with your matrix of who you're working with, who you want to work with come next year. You're really being proactive about preparing for this conversation. The next thing you need to do is be prepared to lead the actual conversation. So when you come into my office for a performance review, I don't want you to sit down and wait for me to start talking, right? I mean, a lot of people assume that they are there to be in listen mode, and I will challenge that assumption every time. A performance review is a conversation. It shouldn't be someone talking at you. It should be you having a conversation with your manager. So have your talking points ready. Talked about that already. And then know your punchline. If you come into my office for a conversation about performance, I'm going to start it by throwing you the ball, right? I'm going to say, hey, Jodi, how are you? So glad to sit down and have time to catch up. How do you think things are going for you? That is going to be the first question I ask you. And I can't tell you how many times someone sitting across the table from me doesn't have an answer. And I think, what a wasted opportunity. This is your time, guys, to shine. This is your time to come tell me how great you are. Tell me about everything, how it's going, and give me the broad strokes overview of what your time has been like at Rypple or Facebook or Gilt or Goldman or wherever you work. Things are going really well. We're meeting all of our revenue targets this quarter, and I feel really good about my role in helping our new advertising accounts. Right? That sets the stage for a really positive conversation. I might not have known all that information. My client relationships are getting better, and I'm learning a ton from Jamie and Chris. I'm really happy. And hopefully you're happy, right? I love to hear that you're happy. If you're not, maybe you start off and tell me what's really going with your advertising accounts, and then you leave the negative stuff for later, or you tell me, I'm working with Jamie and Chris. It's been a bit of a challenge getting the team, to work together in the beginning, but we're really overcoming our obstacles now. It doesn't all have to be sugar and spice. It really should be authentic and true, but I want you to know your punchline. I want you to know what you're going to lead with and how you're going to start off the conversation so that we have a really good conversation. Now, Jason Garrett, head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, has a quote that I love. And Jason says, "I'm not going to tell you everything is okay and allow you to be mediocre. I played football for a lot of years, and the coaches that drive me crazy to this day are the ones that told me I was good all the time. Well, hey, you're doing a great job. And I knew I was mediocre as hell. And the guy that was on my ass, the guy that made me be good every day, is the guy I appreciate right now." That is exactly what I think in terms of the conversation isn't supposed to make you feel good or bad. I don't necessarily care how you feel. I mean, I do because I'm a nice person and I don't want to hurt your feelings. But I'm not doing this to make you feel good. I'm doing it to make you better at your job. So keep that in mind as you're sitting there having the conversation. So how are you going to be receptive? Let's go through these, Nick, and then we will take some more questions.
Okay, great.
Here's the strategy to be receptive. You want to solicit action items for improvement. You got to push back on me and say, okay, great. Tell me how I can get better. You've got to say thank you and be gracious, even if it's a tough conversation, and you need to wait. There's a 24-hour rule. If you are pissy, if you do not like this conversation, you cannot cry in my office. I will say that again. You cannot cry in my office. Please don't cry in a performance review. It really just ruins the whole process. And all I remember is the fact that you cried or you yelled or you screamed, and I won't remember what the conversation was about. You got to keep your cool. And then you take 24 hours and you think through it. So let's look at some of the example language. So in terms of getting action steps from you, here are the questions that I would ask. If it's me and someone tells me that I'm not doing a great job with my programming, I might say, should I ask for more challenging assignments, or do you think I need to spend more time on the ones I already have? Or do you have any suggestions of people I should talk to about managing up or managing cross-divisional communication more effectively? How do you get your clients to give you input more quickly? I know I didn't do a great job. I know it took them 3 months to turn around the information and data that we needed. How do you get your clients to respond more quickly? Or who do you think does a great job of putting together marketing briefs? Really have an honest conversation and show me that, okay, you can take it, right? You can take the information, but you want to get better. You want to be searching for ways so that you can point to improvement in your performance. The next thing you have to do is you have to thank me. And people will look at this slide and say, you know what, that was a terrible conversation, he was an asshole, or there was no value in it for me. But here's the thing. You've got to remember that when someone is taking time to sit down with you and give you a performance review or have a conversation, just an informal feedback conversation, they are taking time out of their busy day and their busy life to invest in your career. That's what I view this conversation as. It is an investment in your career development. So take the time to thank them and acknowledge that. Even if it was a tough conversation, right? I really appreciate your willingness to share your feedback, or I appreciate your candor, right? That's what you want to do. You want to acknowledge that you are appreciative of someone taking the time to give you this feedback, because they don't have to do it, truthfully. There's no rule that says managers should give feedback. Now, I think they should, and I think if you want to be a good manager, you will give feedback. But there are a lot of people who say they don't have time or say they don't know how to do it, to the question we got earlier in the webinar, right? How do employers really manage this process effectively? Take time, be gracious, thank the person you're having a conversation with. And then we get to our 24-hour rule. If you don't like what you hear, and it will happen, right? There's no one in life who's been spared some type of, critical feedback. That's how we all grow. That's how we get better. So what you need to do in the moment is say, well, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I hadn't considered that angle. Or, you know what, I hear you. I don't necessarily agree, but I'd like to think through all of this and come back to you with some additional thoughts or questions. Or ask the question, would it be okay if I took some time to digest all of this and have a follow-up conversation with you next week? Whatever you need to do to manage that conversation and to get away unscathed. When I was on Wall Street, those performance reviews were total ass kickers sometimes, but I never lost my cool. I would get the hell out of my building as fast as I could, and then I'd get on my mobile, right? And I'd call a friend or call my mom or bitch or do what I needed to do. But I promise you, I never did it in front of anyone I worked with. I knew how unprofessional that was, and it really does sabotage your career. So don't be that person. Keep your cool, wait 24 hours, digest the information, and then if you want to have a follow-up conversation a week later or a day later, here's how you can start it. Right? A lot of people say, well, then I don't even know what to say. It's uncomfortable. It's awkward. I don't want to revisit it. I'm sort of over it now. I'm not upset anymore. But really, the adult thing to do, the mature and professional thing to do is follow up. I wanted to follow up on our conversation last week and talk about how I can improve my client relationships. Or I'm really trying hard to be more focused on the details. Here's what I'm doing differently. Here's one. If you get some information that doesn't necessarily confirm what the other person said. I spoke with Andrew and Nancy. They both agree I'm really handling my client relationships well. So I want to make sure I understand your comments from last week and figure out how I can do better, with your team. I've been thinking a lot about improving my attitude, and I want to go over some ideas with you about making that happen. I mean, that's a really tough one, right? If someone says to you, you have a bad attitude, to me, that's a really tough thing to hear, and a lot of people fight it. But maybe this time you think about what they're saying, and maybe they think, maybe they think you have a bad attitude because you're sitting at your desk with your iPod, right? And to you, that's just the way you work. You enjoy working and having music. And so the way to handle that is to say, you know what, I appreciate that to you that comes off as having a bad attitude. Here's why I do that. It makes me more productive. It makes me more accurate. I don't want you to think I have a bad attitude, but I really want to be able to work with my music. So let's talk about a way to make that happen so you don't interpret that as a sign of disrespect. That's what these conversations are for, to make sure you can really be on the same page as your manager. And finally, I will caution that if there are easy fixes in your performance, and I'm sure no one on this phone shows up late, and I'm sure no one's texting or looking at their BlackBerry while they're in a meeting, and I'm sure no one's ever rude to a colleague. But if by any chance you or someone you know falls into the category of having heard feedback on things that are easy fixes, my advice to you is fix them. Don't be that person. Be contrite, own up to it, and fix them. You're right. I apologize about coming into the office late. I will make sure it doesn't happen again. Here's my view. If you're going to be spending 40, 50, 60 hours at work and you're going to work hard, you might as well not get dinged for things that are easy to fix and that are in your control. So it's not worth fighting it. I hear what you're saying about having a bad attitude. That's certainly not the image I want to portray. I will do my best to be more professional. Here's a good one. I don't agree my work is sloppy, but I will make sure to do an extra layer of work to make sure the final docs are coming to you in the shape you want them or in better shape. Maybe you and your manager have a disagreement about what sloppy means. Not everyone has the same definition of a word, right? I'm making a concerted effort to keep everyone in the loop, but I guess I need to brief my teammates more regularly to make sure they know where my projects stand. Those are easy ways to save face. Those are easy ways to get points and say, you know what, I'm going to fix that because I do want to be a rock star. I do want you to love me. And finally, the easy one that many of us have a hard time doing, I just had a conversation last week, not about work, but with my sister-in-law who was angry at me. And I said, you're right. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. And you know what? When you do that, when you say you're right and I'm wrong, there's nothing more to say. Cuts the conversation off, and now you can move forward. You're not focused on the bad stuff. So the end goal of all of this is to show that you are engaged and committed to improvement. You want to bring your manager into the process, get him involved in your career development, and you really want to demonstrate that you're enthusiastic, you're professional, you care about getting better at your job. That's why you are having this conversation. I think about being great on the job as basically making people love you. And the way you will make people love you is by asking for feedback, is by having a performance review where you're an active participant, where you say, you know what, you're right, this could get better. Or here's what I'm doing great at, and here's what I really want to focus on next year. Or about being contrite if you have to be contrite. You know, I'm not saying roll over and take it if someone gives you unfair criticism, but think about what you can do better. If you message to me that you care about making yourself a better professional, then I will love having you on my team. So with that, I will turn it back over to Nick to talk about the upcoming webinars, and then I will take some Q&A.
Great. Well, I just wanted to make people quickly aware that we do have these webinars coming up soon, so we will be following up with further details. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Jodi to be able to answer some of the great questions that have been coming in. One question that was really interesting that I wanted to share was somebody asked about what to do when a manager wants to share performance reviews between people on the team. How do you handle that situation?
That's a really good question. I've never been asked that question before. If a manager wants to share a performance review, I guess my first question would be to ask why. I'd want to know what the purpose of that is, and if the manager thinks there's value in, letting people know what other people's performance reviews look like, I would want that manager to explain it to me. Right? I would want them to be able to make the case for me of why it is value add to share that information, because to me, that doesn't make a ton of sense. I think that, you could have conversations with a team where you could maybe talk about what people have done well and what people are focused on, doing next year. But I don't know that you necessarily, I think of these as confidential on some level, that they should be between manager and employee, and that they shouldn't be shared with other employees, certainly. Whether or not they're shared with the management team broadly, if it is, again, used as a tool for development and performance improvement. But I would certainly ask the question from there, I'd throw it back in their court. What is the value add of that? What is the purpose of that? Because to me, on the surface, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, that is very helpful. Another question that I think is important for you to answer, Jodi, has to do with sort of the negativity, the negative perception that a lot of people bring to the performance review process. So when you're dealing with a manager who is kind of relentlessly negative and their focus is all about, what's wrong rather than what's right, how do you handle that kind of attitude?
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, I think that the way that you negate that is, one, being able to talk to your achievements and making sure that you get those into the conversation, and two, reframing the discussion. So if you've got a manager that is just telling you everything that's going wrong, again, I think you throw it back into their court, which is, okay, let's just say I'll agree with you. For the sake of argument, let's just say I'll concede all the points, that this, and this are not right, or not going well, or I'm not doing a good job. and I don't necessarily agree with you, but let's just say for the sake of argument, I will concede the points. Let's change the conversation now. Let's talk about making it better. Because you want to be focused on the solution, not the problem. People who get ahead at work are solution-based. They are not problem-based. And if your manager is living in this world of negativity and focusing only on the problem, well, it sounds to me like they're not a very good manager. And so what I would do is I would, for the sake of argument, let them be right. Maybe they just need to be right. Okay, I'll give you that. Let's assume this isn't working right. Let's assume this client engagement could have gone a whole lot smoother. What would you do differently? Right? What do you think I need to be doing? Let's figure out how we can have a conversation in 3 months again that looks nothing like the one we're having today. What do you recommend? Because that's when they may, have to take a step back and think, well, God, I'm not really being part of the solution here. I'm not helping out. So that's what I would recommend doing.
Now, there have been a number of questions that sort of focus on the idea of frequency. How often should you be having reviews? I know at Rypple, we very much believe that reviews should be a review. So there shouldn't be any surprises when you come in because you're already getting regular feedback on a weekly or very frequent basis from your manager. But obviously that doesn't happen everywhere. So how do you kind of determine what the right frequency is for a review?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that, Nick. Thank you. So here's what I say. Once a year for a review is not enough, because if you find out in December that you're not pulling your weight, it's too late to fix it, potentially. Once a year is not enough. Once a week is way too much, and I'm super annoyed if you're coming into my office and asking for feedback every week. And one of the things I hear about millennials and Gen Y is that you want to get feedback really, regularly, often, real time on how you're doing. And what I will just caution you against is that it can be burdensome on people to have to give you feedback all of the time. I mean, I think Rypple makes it so much easier for people to be getting real-time feedback in snippets, right, and on demand, and make that process easy on them. But in terms of a performance review conversation, or just a conversation in terms of let's sit down for 20 minutes and debrief how this process was and let's get some feedback, I always say quarterly is the right goal. I think that if you are getting, feedback and touch points 3 to 4 times a year from various people, you're doing a great job. Now, some of you may need to adjust that upward, and maybe it's monthly, but I think that's about as often as it should be. I would say between monthly and quarterly is a good target. Now, if you're working with a team and you've got a 3-week project with them and then you're done, you might consider getting feedback on how things went with that team. And if you don't have a lot of people to be spreading your requests around, then maybe you only do it, 3 times a year. But it's certainly not daily. It's not weekly. And I even think monthly may be too much depending on your circumstances. I say shoot for quarterly. And if you're a student and you're a summer intern, I'd say get 2 to 3 times over a summer internship.
Well, that's a great answer. Another question that I wanted you to address, Jodi, has to do with the issue of compensation. I mean, I think you pointed out during your presentation that compensation should really be separate from the performance review. And I think one of the reasons why traditional reviews have become so maligned and so ineffective is that they kind of roll these issues of promotions and in with job performance and compensation in with job performance. And the question is, if you're in an environment where that's happening, where it's kind of a performance review free-for-all and you're getting your feedback about performance mixed in with all this other stuff, how do you proactively as an employee stop that from happening and get an employer to focus just on those things that you need to improve going forward?
Right. So it's a great question, and I think the answer is you need to separate the process. And so what you need to do is initiate these conversations or schedule a feedback session or schedule a performance review 3 to 6 months out from that compensation process so that you can say to your manager, your supervisor, listen, I don't want to talk about comp. I don't want this to be related to, that is a separate conversation for November or for January. I want to talk today in June about what to do for the next 3 to 6 months so that when comp time does come up, I can come back to you and say, listen, I've done it all. I've met my targets. I've exceeded my expectations. Here's why I want to be where I want to be in compensation. Right? Compensation is a very different, and it's a tough conversation. But I think that if you find that it's all being lumped together, to the extent that you can take the reins of this, and again, it goes back to my belief that getting feedback from someone, it's actually your responsibility. It's not your manager's responsibility to make sure you're getting feedback quarterly. Your manager's got a lot on her plate. And so if you take charge of the process and you say to folks, listen, I really want to get some feedback before it gets all mixed in with comp or before it's too late, then that's how you separate the process.
That makes a lot of sense. One other question that came up had to do with, so many of us today work remotely. Here at Rypple, we have, a team in Toronto and another team in San Francisco. And, a big part of that review is kind of being able to look the person in the eye and see, some of the nonverbal communication that's going on. So if you are working remotely from your manager, are there things that you can do to sort of to make that process work better so that it really ends up being valuable for you as an employee?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have to think about that, Nick, because in my organization, I have a few people working with and for me, and we are all remote. But typically, if I'm giving feedback or asking for feedback, I do it when we are together in New York because I like to have that conversation in person over the phone. I just think it's far more effective. So, to the extent possible, I would say have those conversations in person. Schedule that around when you will actually be seeing or touching your manager. Maybe maybe if you want to do a feedback session and you're remote, maybe do Skype versus just phone only. Or maybe just try and set up the conversation in advance, again, with sort of asking for specific feedback or knowing what topics you're going to cover so that, no one is blindsided. But there is no substitution for in-person, face-to-face conversation. And so, I got to think about that one because maybe it's not realistic anymore to say wait and have these conversations in person. But I do think it is hard for people to receive feedback, over the phone. I just think you don't get the full extent of it.
Right. Well, we're almost out of time here. I've gotten a bunch of questions here that are manager focused. Mm-hmm. I know that you addressed one of those earlier about kind of the responsibility of the manager in the review process. So I think we're going to have you back to
yeah, sure. And maybe what we can do is, or maybe we can do a blog post and answer some of those questions for folks.
That sounds like a great idea. So I just, on behalf of everyone at Rypple and everyone who had the benefit of listening today, I just wanted to say thanks again for taking the time, Jodi. And this was incredibly valuable, and I think we'll give everyone a different spin on how to take performance reviews from being that painful, awful thing to something that can actually provide value and take you forward in your career.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nick. I was thrilled to be here. I had a great time. I hope it was helpful for everyone, and I would love to be back. And we'll go ahead and do that. Let's get a blog post together so that people can get their questions answered, or feel free to reach out to me directly, greatonthejob.com, Jodi at Great on the Job, Facebook, Twitter, HBR. You can find me everywhere. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Terrific. And for those of you who are interested, just to let you know, we will be sending out the recording and the slides of today's webinar so that everybody can have them for their reference and share them as well. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you at the next Rypple webinar on Thursday, September 29th, all about leadership with John Baldoni. Thanks again.